Hello and welcome to episode 1 of Life's Toughest Innings. As always, I'm Grant, and this podcast is all about the battles we face, the lessons life forces onto us, and the strength we build along the way. So today, I'm starting right at the beginning, my early years in South Africa, a time filled with love, complexity, hardship, hope, and a lot of moments that shaped who I eventually became. Let's talk this path together. So I guess the best place to start would be my family roots and living in a complex South Africa. I was born to a loving British mother and a proud South African father. Two completely different worlds somehow coming together in a country that was anything but simple at the time. Mum originally from the Lake District, Barren Furnace, and my dad was a through and through Durbanite. They met, fell in love instantly, and as they say, the rest is history. And, I came along in 1982. This was before the end of apartheid. The country was divided socially, politically, culturally, and to arrive right in the middle of it was a very difficult experience. But at home, none of that mattered. My parents created this little bubble of love and normality. My mum showed kindness in everything that she did. My dad showed strength and pride. And together, they raised me with this balance of compassion and resilience that would guide me for years. From what I can remember growing up as a young boy, my parents were very protective. I lived a very sheltered life. I didn't, in any shape or form, witness any face-to-face violence or danger as such. Although it was there, I never saw it. And, I read a lot recently that, the statistics for the violent crimes in South Africa has gone through the roof, which is very, very sad. The one thing I try and explain to people who've never been to South Africa, like any other country, is completely different to live there as opposed to going there on holiday. It's a fantastic place to go on holiday, and I would recommend it to anybody who would want to go on holiday. Just absolute natural beauty, fantastic sights to see, and fantastic wine and food to sample while you're there. I was lucky in a way because, my mum and dad sheltered me from all the issues that were going on at the time. And it's difficult to try and make people appreciate that when your country is on the verge of civil war, you've got one or two choices. One, you stay and you see what happens, potentially putting your life at risk, or two, you're going to leave. And my parents at the time, said that both options were on the table. And, I was fortunate in the sense that, my parents would always put me first. And then later, when my younger brother arrived in 1986, the country had significantly deteriorated in terms of the political and social situations there. So we were always encouraged, or I was always encouraged, to mix well with other races. My parents were in no way, shape or form racist, and they were in no way, shape or form part of apartheid. We wanted to mix with other races and other families, and I remember lots of friends who I spent a lot of time with, and I went on many birthday party trips around Durban. That sort of experience was great. And I can remember this one birthday party in particular I went to. It was called the old animal farm in Durban. Now, people who will remember that are of similar age to me now, but the animal farm was fantastic because, you could go there and you could ride a donkey and, just normal things that young kids like doing, really. And I remember being put in this pen with loads of young little chicks, and some of the girls that were there at the time for this birthday party, they were pretty chilled and relaxed, but yet it was myself and a few of the other boys that actually ended up crying because of we didn't enjoy the chicks walking and crawling all over us. It was quite a funny sensation, really. But yeah, that was a fun moment to remember. At home, always had a beautiful home, and I remember that our first home in Durban, and Mum and Dad had a swimming pool put in and spent many times in there, and your houses in South Africa at the time were going through a significant change in terms of how you would protect yourself and protect your family. And I always remember the windows having what they call burglar bars on the windows, and Mum and Dad, went out of their way to make sure that, it was a deterrent and that we were safe. So I guess, as growing up, we were fortunate enough to travel back and forth to the UK because my mum's parents and family lived here. And I always enjoyed coming to the UK as a young boy, especially during Christmas time for obvious reasons. So to get to experience both countries and both cultures from an early age, I think paved the way to help me grow up and mature quickly, and have a different perspective on life and people. But it was the early kind of school life. When I started at junior school, reality hit me very fast. It was strict, intense, and at times unforgiving. I mean, I remember where you could still get caned if you didn't do your homework, if you were untidy. Your shirt had to be tucked in, your tie had to be done up in a certain way. Your uniform had to be immaculate because you were representing your school, not just whilst you were at school, but in the public eye. And South African schools are very, very specific about how you portray yourself in the public eye. And one of those things is looking neat and tidy and presenting the school uniform, the badge, very well in the public eye. But if you didn't fit the mold, you felt it. You felt like, I'm like a fish out of water here. And especially from an early age, the two junior schools that I went to, one was obviously a pre-primary school where there were quite relaxed measures, but it was the kind of senior primary school that I went to where I knew that I would struggle to begin with, because I hadn't experienced anything like it before, and especially from the powers that be, the headmaster, the deputies, and the head of departments, and the teachers that were there. And I'm not including all of them in this, but they were very much old school disciplinarians, and if you stepped out of line, you knew about it, and you were punished accordingly. I wasn't the loudest, I wasn't the most academic, and I certainly wasn't the child who thrived under pressure at the time. I was more practical, more hands-on, and back then that wasn't always recognized as it is potentially today. So I do remember feeling out of place, trying my best, but constantly feeling like I was falling behind, especially in the academic side of things. And it planted early seeds of self-doubt within myself, but also a quiet determination that I didn't fully understand yet, and which, 8, 9, 10-year-old would understand that. You wouldn't. Before I went to senior primary school, I remember junior primary school, finding my talent for cricket. But life has a way of sort of balancing struggle with discovery. So for me, that discovery was cricket. It was the first thing I felt naturally good at, the first thing that lit me up inside. I wasn't an academic, and I accepted that early. But give me a cricket ball or give me a cricket bat, and I felt like me, like I had a purpose. Cricket became more than a sport. It became my escape, my confidence, and my identity. I remember going to a big sports club in Durban North called Crusaders. And on a Saturday, they used to have what they called Baker's Mini Cricket, where you would have loads of teams from different schools, different areas, all gathering together on one massive field. And it did become a bit of a free-for-all sometimes, because you would have people hitting the ball into sort of other games. The best way to describe Baker's Mini Cricket is almost like All-Stars cricket in the UK. So you would rock up there, and you would have that lovely smell of fresh cut grass, which always reminds me of the cricket season. The sun was blazing as always in Durban, South Africa. It was very hot. Mum and Dad were sat supporting me. And I remember, not really having any coaching to begin with. I just picked up a bat, and it just felt natural. The bat felt natural in my hand, and I had a hand-eye coordination like no other at the time, at that level. And I remember smacking a few softballs, as they probably describe now, and losing a few. And my pre-primary school teacher, who ran or looked after the team, she was just amazed at my ability as a young boy to hit the ball very far. And I think that just immediately continued when I went into senior primary school. But before that, before I left pre-primary school, unfortunately there was an accident or an incident that happened, and again, it was a moment from my early childhood that still lives in me today. And that was the day I got burnt by hot cooking oil. I can still remember the shock, the pain, the actual smell of my skin burning. But more than that, I remember my mum's face and how devastated she was. It was an accident that taught me two powerful things: how fragile life can be, and second, how deeply a parent feels their child's pain. Even at that age, I understood love in a very different way. It was a very, very shocking night, not just for a young boy, but even an adult to go through and experience that. And I remember we had just had our house renovated somewhat, and one of the renovations was actually outside. We had had the driveway resurfaced, and my dad had taken the cars to our family friends who lived just up the road, because we couldn't park the cars on the driveway, obviously. And so he was out at the time, and I remember just sat in my mum's room doing some homework at the time, and my mum came to check on me and see if I was all right and if I was actually doing my homework. And I just remember this massive cloud of black smoke coming into my parents' room where I sat. So both my mum and I, we ran to the kitchen, and our house at the time, we had really high ceilings. And I just remember seeing the chip pan on fire, and the flames were to the roof. And we had a double kitchen. We had an area where you would cook, and you would have cupboards for storage, and then we'd have another part of the kitchen which had your fridges, your freezers, your just basically all your white goods would be there. And unfortunately, I think my mum panicked at the time, and you know, in those days, no sort of health and safety fire blankets, and obviously people who were cooking in the early middle 90s will understand that the cooking pans and the cooking oils are not what they are now. And Mum wanted to throw the chip pan out the back door, and she had asked me to open the back door. And unfortunately, instead of, you know, picking the pan up with something more protective, she picked it up with the oven gloves. And unfortunately, the flames were that fierce and strong, it actually burnt through the cooking gloves and burnt my mum's hands. And unfortunately, she dropped the pan, and I slipped in this pool of hot cooking oil. And I think, to try and describe the pain, it was almost like feeling someone had potentially started to peel back my skin. And if you can imagine, you've cut yourself, you've taken the skin off, and then somebody spraying some form of either a deodorant or some form of chemical on the wound. It felt like that. It was a very distinctive, painful feeling, and you know, full respect to my mum. You know, she sacrificed her own healings because she had burnt her hands, she had burnt her feet. I mean, I even remember Shane, our dog at the time, had received a few burns. So that was sad. But my mum, in true mother heroism style, sacrificed her own healing to heal me instantly. And she ran a cold bath and she put me in there. And she was going from there. And I remember her limping. She tried to shield me from looking at her feet, because her feet were completely wrecked. And it was a very distressing experience. It was a very traumatizing moment. And I think seeing your skin and seeing it change while you sit in a cold bath, and there's nothing you can do about it. There's literally nothing you can do about it. And those people out there who have experienced significant burns will be able to relate with me. There's just nothing you can do about it. And she was hobbling from the kitchen to the bathroom where I sat in the bath. She was trying to get on the phone. Obviously no mobiles on those days. And obviously my dad came back. We had already phoned for an ambulance. And 2 hours had passed since the accident. And the ambulance, in the end, just didn't rock up. So my dad drove us to a hospital. And it was one of those moments where, for the first time in my life, I'd seen a very law-abiding citizen such as my dad, rushing, panicking, trying to get to the hospital, which was at least a good 20-minute drive away from where we lived. You know, he had put his hazards on, he was going through red lights. He just wanted to get us there. And I think, you know, seeing that as I sat in the back seat being cuddled by my mum, who had put all these cold, wet towels and blankets over me, I just thought, I'm really, really lucky. I've got two parents who just want to see their son safe and looked after. And it has been emotional on most occasions trying to tell this story, and especially to people that have come in and out of my life. I've almost felt the need to explain myself as to what happened, why I've got scars on my body. But reality is, I shouldn't have to, because it was an accident and I didn't mean it to happen. But as you'll discover later on, this wouldn't be the first time or last time that I would experience some difficulties from this trauma in my life. And, you know, me and Mum, we were in hospital for 3 months. You know, Mum needed to learn how to walk again. I remember a burn specialist who was of Afrikaans descent coming in, and the way he spoke to me and the way he manhandled me, lifting my leg up and like rubbing the back of my leg to say that we're just going to cut here because they was talking about skin grafts. I mean, imagine doing that to a young, 9-year-old. And, I was in tears. I went and told my mum. My mum was furious, made sure that, that burn specialist was fired immediately. And then our main GP, if you like, our family GP, took over, which is what we wanted. And he was very good. And when I arrived at the hospital that night, actually, this is a bit of a funny story. Funny, maybe embarrassing, but yeah, I'm going to tell you anyway. I remember arriving. Obviously, my dad carried me in. Mum was just slightly behind, hobbling, straight into the A&E. The A&E staff were absolutely fantastic. And I remember that at the time I had my favorite Spider-Man pajamas on. And I was lying there and all I could smell was my skin burning. And I was in a lot of pain. I was going into shock, and they needed to act quickly. So one of the things that they needed to do, obviously, to assess the damage was to take my pajamas off. And it wasn't just the fact that they had to cut through my pajamas, so obviously destroying and ending my Spider-Man pajamas journey, but I was more concerned that they were going to see my willy. But yeah, they were absolutely brilliant. And I remember the staff using ice cream sticks to put this burn cream on my body because they couldn't use their hands, because if they used their hands, my skin would have just fallen off. So that was the extreme nature of my injuries. But for 3 months, I helped my mum learn how to walk again. My mum said, I'm never going to be able to walk again. And I was like, not on my watch. I got her up out of bed. I walked her up and down the corridors every day. We had family and friends come and visit us every day. And I think just before we were getting to the end of our treatment and our time in hospital, I remember my mum pulling me aside, and she said, and I'm trying not to get upset with this because my mum meant a lot to me, but my mum said that this experience has shown what a strong individual you are at a very young age, and I'm very proud of you. I'll never forget that. And she said, you've looked after your mum at such a young age, which, I think any 9 or 10-year-old wouldn't fully understand or appreciate if they hadn't been in that situation. And yeah, I just wanted to look after my mum. So obviously a return to school was difficult. For many years I had to accept myself, and I was facing bullies. So like many kids, I didn't love the way I looked at the time. I wasn't confident in myself, and the bullies picked up on that. I guess they always do. They always go for the kind of weakest individual. So I had to learn to accept myself slowly, piece by piece, and more importantly, I had to learn to stand up for myself. Not with anger, but with self-respect. But through it all, my parents taught me something powerful. Treat everyone fairly, no matter how they treat you. Show compassion, even when people don't show it back. It wasn't easy, I've got to be honest. Especially when you're a shy, quiet kid, just trying to get by. But it formed my moral backbone. And I remember I had to deal with one incident where it was a school assembly at DPHS, a very well-known senior primary school in Durban. And at the time, I was sat in the middle of the hall, and the hall could accommodate anywhere between 600 to 800 people. And at the time of sitting down for assembly, I was sat in the middle. And like most school assembly arrangements, they kind of go from the youngest year all the way to the eldest year, with the youngest years sitting at the front and the eldest year sitting at the back. So I was kind of in the middle. And I remember sitting there, and I had my summer uniform on, which I had shorts on, and I remember sitting down, and some kids came and sat next to me, either side, on the left and right hand side of me. And once they looked down and saw the scars on my legs, they quickly decided that they were going to distance themselves from me. So I remember sat in this assembly, and I looked to the left and I looked to the right, and there were 3 spaces empty between me and the next child. And again, that really hit me hard. That kind of, made me feel, well, do I belong here? Why are they treating me like this? And, I guess it's the looks. My mum and dad always encouraged me never to stare at somebody that would appear to have any physical differences, if you like. So the fact that I was now getting stared at, and I felt this really sort of uncomfortable atmosphere in a school environment that I potentially should have felt safe and accepted in, I didn't. For a few months, I was bullied. On a few occasions, my mum had to personally come to the school and speak to the individuals to their face as to why they were bullying me, what was their issue with me, considering that I had never provoked anything towards them. And, I hate to say it, but the powers that be at DPHS never did anything. Their message was loud and clear, is that you need to toughen up. You don't need to listen to them. It's just kids. But what they don't realize is how that affected me, not just in that particular moment, but how it affected me later in my life. Because as I'll describe in future episodes, there will be reference to these experiences. And again, as a kid, I think everyone has their little differences that they don't like about themselves. For me, it was my hair. I was getting bullied. There were some racial comments towards me, and I kind of knew where that was coming from because of, with my mum being British and my dad South African, and my dad appearing to have a slightly darker shade of skin. They automatically assumed that I was not a pure white person. And if anyone knows and understands the complexity in South Africa, if you're not fully white, that means you're talking white, and your hair is not as it would appear as a European white, then people would start to question your ethnic background, which again really, really hurt me. It hurt my family, especially my dad. And the people that kept on making these comments, your hair looks like a toilet brush, your hair looks like a microphone, referring to me in a very derogatory, racist manner. Again, DPHS and the powers that be never did anything about it. And, on many occasions, my parents went to the school to meet with them, and, they just brushed it under the carpet because they were more concerned about their public notoriety as a school, as a really good up and coming school, not just domestically but nationally. It was right up there in the top 10 at least, and they were more concerned about that rather than if any of this actually got out, what it would do. And it was very difficult to accept, very difficult to accept. And my parents were angry. And when I think about it, there were plenty of opportunities for them to address it and to nip it in the bud and to actually tackle the people that were behaving in this manner towards me. But again, the people that they were going to take on or address, they were people with a lot more money, and they had some form of connection to the school, whether they were an old boy, or they had contributed to the business side of the school, if you know what I mean. So yeah, nothing was done. And again, I left that environment, that school, still questioning who I was. Again, leaving as a 13-year-old, I had just got braces on my teeth to get my teeth nice and straight. My parents had started to look into ways of, changing the complexion of my hair. So these are all kind of experiences that, should I have faced, I'm going to say no, particularly in an environment such as where I was. I should have felt safe, accepted, and I should have never, ever have face that alone and with my parents. You know, the powers that be at DPHS should have intervened. And another thing that I did face at the time was the reality of the sporting opportunities that were starting to present to me at DPHS. You know, I was always the first name on their cricket A team team sheet. You know, growing up, especially in South Africa at that time, if you wanted to go far in sport, you needed to be at the right school. You needed the right environment, the right system, you know, having the right coaches, mentors, people that would just put your name down because you went to the right school. We did know that. My parents knew it. I saw the stress in them, that fear that no matter how talented I was, I might not get the chance unless everything lined up perfectly. I was always there or thereabouts with potentially the top 22 cricketers in my age group at the time, and a lot of them, you know, as I'll discuss in other episodes, it went on to play professional cricket. But seeing my parents upset when I was upset because the selection for Natal schools at the time, which was at under 13 level, didn't go my way. I wasn't selected in a squad of 15, and they had to select from 22 players. But up until that point, I had done literally everything. And at the time, I was the best wicketkeeper in that age group at the time. And I was working on my batting at the time. But it taught me early that my journey wasn't just mine. It affected the people who loved me, so my parents. And I remember when I didn't gain selection, it hurt me. I broke down. I questioned whether I wanted to continue playing the sport. There was no feedback given by the coaches and the people that were in charge of selecting these school teams at the time. And again, it was always the same faces selecting these teams, you know, and they were biased, of course, and, you know, they were very patronizing most of the time. And it didn't matter. You could have a fantastic season because you went to the wrong school, because your face didn't fit in, because your parents didn't have money, or were completely different to any other parent that these selectors and administrators had dealt with. You weren't selected. So yeah, that was a very, very difficult time, and it paved the way for me to understand very quickly about sport. And nothing's guaranteed in sport, and you've got to work hard, and you've got to be prepared for those very dark, unsuccessful days. But again, as a young 13-year-old, who would understand that? And again, it was what was said, and how the teams were put together, and at the time, I remember there was 3 of us from DPHS who went forward to the final selection trials, if you like. And all 3 of us, as time has gone on, have gone on to play professional cricket at some point. But I remember the 2 that were selected ahead of me. One, his father was a current South African cricket player. And the other one, his father had played provincial cricket, first-class cricket for Natal. So if you can now understand that, yeah, and I'll be honest with you, they were talented cricketers, but I was the only one out of 3 left out. So to me, it feels like, well, your dad is not an ex-professional cricketer or a current international cricketer, so therefore you will not be selected on that basis. That's what it felt like. But, you know, when I look back on it, it kind of shaped and paved the way I went and approached my cricket later on in life. And again, you know, it's the reality of sport. It's not guaranteed. Success is not guaranteed. Selection is not guaranteed. But every now and then it's always nice to potentially have someone on your side to push for your name and push for your talent. And I didn't have that. I think growing up also, I was very fortunate to be able to travel to the UK a lot. I was lucky to have holidays when I was young. And every time I went, it was like seeing the world in a completely different colour. It was a completely different culture, obviously, different atmosphere, different opportunities. It opened my mind before I even hit my teenage years. It made me realise that the world was bigger than the circumstances that I grew up in. And the one thing I always enjoyed about coming to the UK on holidays was, firstly, the people were very, very different. And obviously it was completely a different way of life. And whereas South Africa, growing up, you were always outside because we had the weather and we had big gardens and swimming pools. Whereas coming to the UK as a young boy, I quickly realised that it was more kind of indoor orientated lifestyles. You know, people having computer games and, you know, having this really controlled, comfortable environment in your front room with a fire and the TV and staying warm, and I really enjoyed that for some reason, especially when I went to my late nana's. She always went out of her way to make our holidays special. I was very fortunate, really, because, you know, my nana was a fantastic woman. You know, she had difficulties in her adult life, and she always tried to impart her knowledge and her experiences upon us in a way that I can only describe that she just wanted you to be a good person, a good human being like she had, no matter what she had faced, the difficulties that she had faced. I mean, imagine raising 7 kids on your own and your husband is, you know, here, there and everywhere, and spending his wages on cigarettes and alcohol rather than on the family. Well, that's how it's been told to me anyway. So yeah, I guess what I'm trying to put across here and set up for the next episode is that, you know, these early years were tough, but they were also beautiful. You know, they formed the foundation of my character, compassion from my mum, strength from my dad, humility from struggle, I guess, confidence from playing cricket, and perspective from travelling. You know, these experiences didn't just shape me, they prepared me for the innings still to come. This is just the beginning. So in episode 2, I'll talk more about my teenage years, going to high school, more holidays, more difficulties. So there's the sort of identity, the pressure, sport, and the choices that set the next stage of my life that was unfolding. So thank you for listening to Life's Toughest Innings. If today's episode gave you something to think about, please follow the podcast on YouTube and Spotify. We're also on social media. And I will see you next week. Thank you for listening.